Okay, tell me if this has ever happened to you. You read a book, you really enjoy it, it leaves you with a lot of thoughts and feelings, so you decide to look online and look at reviews because, hey, this was really interesting. This left me with a lot to talk about. I bet other people took different things away from this. I should see what other people are saying. So then you go online, and then all of the top reviews on YouTube are negative reviews of people just trashing this book that just changed your life. That's the experience I just had with The Dead House by Kurtagich. So today, I am going to try to sell the book to you and convince you that it's actually pretty great. And for a certain type of reader, I think this would be the perfect spooky Halloweenish read. The Dead House is a young adult horror novel, and it's kind of like the written version of a true crime documentary. It's not true crime, everything is fictional, but it's presented that way, right? So all we're told at the beginning is that there was a fire at this boarding school and several people were killed. And we are told that the main suspect in that fire is a girl named Caitlin Johnson. This is an epistolary novel, which means the book itself is diary entries, letters, notes, hospital records, police records, and it's all presented as documents that exist within the world of the story. Think like Dracula is a really good example of this. And a lot of these epistolary documents that make up the book are excerpts from Caitlin Johnson's diary. The thing that is so interesting about this is that Caitlin Johnson doesn't exist. Caitlin is one of two girls who share one body. Carly, the quote-unquote real person, the person whose name and identity matches this body's birth certificate, is out during the day, and then as soon as the sun sets, Caitlin comes out. When the story starts, Carly and Caitlin have been in treatment for dissociative identity disorder. Throughout the book, you question whether they really do have dissociative identity disorder or whether there's something else going on, something maybe a little spooky, maybe a little supernatural. And I promise we will talk about how this book handles dissociative identity disorder and other mental illnesses later in the video. But yeah, that's our story, that's our mystery, and as we read, we are unraveling what happened to Caitlin and to Carly in the days leading up to the fire, and trying to piece together what was really going on with them. So now that we've talked about what The Dead House is, let's talk about why you should read it. And this is kind of difficult to do because I feel like this is one of those books where it really is best to go in blind. I feel like the less you know about the plot and the characters, the fewer expectations you have, the more you are going to enjoy reading this book. So I'm going to try to avoid any major spoilers, and I'm going to give you guys just a taste. I'm going to give you just enough to hopefully convince you to read this book because I do think it's underrated, and I think a lot of my viewers specifically would really enjoy this. So let's talk about why I enjoyed The Dead House. I found out about this book and decided to read it because of a video by Emily Reads Books, which I will link in the description to this video, where she talked about it as part of a list of books that were similar to House of Leaves. And if you don't know what House of Leaves is, it's a book that is famous for having an unreliable narrator. It's written in a very unique way. It has story within a story stuff going on. It uses the format of the book as part of the storytelling. So like words will be falling off the page or they'll be laid out in a weird way. And that's part of the horror of that book. So because that's where I was coming from, and because this was recommended to me as a book that was similar to House of Leaves and would be a similar reading experience, I think I had a very different set of expectations than a lot of other readers did going into this book. I kind of knew that it was going to have an unreliable narrator. I knew that there was going to be weird story within a story stuff. I knew that there was going to be things going on with the way that the actual formatting of the book was laid out and the story interacting with the formatting. And because I was expecting all of that, I was really excited when it happened. I was really excited for it because I love House of Leaves and I love the way this book does similar things. But I think if I was just a typical YA reader and I was just looking for another good, spooky book and I was wanting to read something that was very straightforward, just kind of a classic ghost story, teen scream, I think this would have disappointed me. I think if I had gone into this wanting to read something that reminded me of a slasher movie, I would have hated it. But I didn't. I went into this expecting something more like House of Leaves, and because of that, I was kind of prepared. So I think that's a good point of comparison. I think that's a good way to approach this book. And I have a list here that I have made of people who should read The Dead House. So, people who I think would enjoy this book are people who enjoy unreliable narrators, people who enjoy epistolary fiction, like we talked about earlier, fiction where the entire story is in-universe documents, people who enjoy psychological horror and don't mind a little bit of a slow burn, and people who don't mind if a book leaves some of its questions unanswered. If you need everything to be explained at the end of your horror story, you're not going to enjoy this book. If you need to have a protagonist that you like and you trust and you can root for, you're probably not going to enjoy this book. But if you're okay with an unreliable narrator, if you're okay with a book that is presented as a collection of documents, and if you're okay with having some lingering mysteries at the end, I think you'll really enjoy this. Had to take my jacket off because it's getting a little toasty in here. Anyway, those are some things that I think will either really make you love this book or really make you hate this book, depending on your preferences as a reader. And I do think this is a matter of preference. I don't think that I'm necessarily more intelligent or high-minded than other readers. We just look for different things in our books, and that's totally okay. But because of what I like, especially in a horror novel, this was really perfect for me. So if any of the things I mentioned sound compelling to you, I think you'd really enjoy this. I want to talk a little bit about my thoughts on this book, but again, no spoilers. But feel free to stick around if you want to get a better feel for what this book is about and how I felt about it. I want to start by saying that this is a story where dissociative identity disorder is a plot point. That is the diagnosis that Carly and Caitlin have received. And I get really cautious when a book uses dissociative identity disorder or any personality disorder as part of its story, especially in the horror genre, because I know there is a history in this genre of using personality disorders as an explanation for why someone does bad things. And that demonizes real mental health conditions that affect real people. And this is something very, very old. This is something that goes back at least to the movie Psycho, which had a big dissociative identity disorder twist. And it's something that is unfortunately still a really common trope in this genre. So I am very cautious about books that use this specific diagnosis in their plot. That being said, I felt like this book did a really good job of not demonizing the diagnosis. I feel like this was a much more grounded and realistic portrayal of dissociative identity disorder than I see in a lot of other books. I felt like there was genuine compassion, not only for Carly, who is the host in this DID system, but also for Caitlin, who is an alter. This book very much takes the point of view that Caitlin is a real person and that her thoughts and feelings matter just as much as Carly's. And that kind of compassion is something that is missing, I think, in a lot of stories where dissociative identity disorder is used in a horror plotline. This book uses magic or witchcraft or whatever you would like to call it as a plot point. But like the DID, I don't think that the book demonizes folk magic or witchcraft. This is a personal pet peeve for me as someone who identifies as a witch and as a pagan. I feel like in the horror genre specifically, there are a lot of books that demonize our spiritual practices. I feel like folk magic specifically, so things like hoodoo, things like conjure, tend to get twisted in a way that's frankly disrespectful. This book, I am thrilled to report, does not do that. And the author actually found a really interesting and creative way to get around this, which is that she made up her own magic system. To avoid any issues with borrowing from real life cultures, I don't know that that's why she did it, but it reads that way to me. She created a folk magic system for her story. It's presented in a very grounded, believable way. As someone who writes books about witchcraft and who knows a lot about these topics, I thought that this was just a kind of obscure folk magic system I had never heard of. It was presented in a way that felt very similar to things that do exist in real life. And it was presented in a way that felt very realistic if you know what to look for. So I was really surprised to learn that the Scottish folk magic in this book is entirely fictional. And I think that was a really neat way to have these occult themes in your work without demonizing a real belief system. So that was something else that I really, really loved about this book. For me, one of the things that I like in a psychological horror is I like that feeling of not knowing what's real or not. I like feeling that sort of instability. I like not knowing if I can trust the narrator and if I can trust their version of what happened. So that's something that I really enjoyed, but I can also see that being a turnoff for people because this is not a book that is going to tell you what really happened. No one is going to come on screen at the end of the story like the psychologist in Psycho and tell you, oh, this is what happened, here's what caused it, and this and this and this and this. There's nothing like that. This is a book where you're never 100% sure if what you're reading reflects the reality. And that can be very frustrating, but it's something that I really enjoy, specifically in a horror story. I already mentioned House of Leaves. Parts of this book also reminded me of the book Bunny by Mona Awad, which is another one of my personal favorites. It's almost magical realism, the way that these fantastical or hallucination elements are woven into the everyday life of the characters. This also kind of reminded me of A24 movies, especially The Witch and Saint Maud. So if you can sort of picture that vibe in a book and that sort of disconnect from reality in a narrator, that's kind of what we're getting into here. The biggest critique I saw from negative reviews of this book was that people absolutely hate the ending. And respectfully, I disagree. I felt like the ending of this book really tied up the themes that the book had been building toward. I also feel like the book makes it very clear from the beginning that we are not going to get answers. This is presented as a sort of documentary on an unsolved mystery. So the fact that it's unsolved tells you that there's some lingering questions. I think what bothered a lot of people about this book is that it's never made, and again, no spoilers, but it's never made explicitly clear whether what is happening to the characters is supernatural or psychological or some combination of the two. Do Carly and Caitlin really have dissociative identity disorder? Or is there a supernatural explanation for what they're experiencing? Are they literally two souls that are sharing a body? Is Caitlin having hallucinations, or is she really being haunted by something evil? The book definitely implies things, and I think there's a very clear conclusion that you could draw from it. But these things are never spelled out for you. You do have to do a little bit of the work on your side as the reader to piece together a version of what happened that is satisfying for you. And again, that's something I really enjoy, but if you are looking for just an easy, spooky, ghost story campfire read, this is not that. This is a book that is intentionally vague and intentionally blurs the lines between reality and fantasy, and that either will or won't be your vibe, but it's definitely my vibe, and I absolutely loved every second of it. So, in conclusion, if anything I have said in this video has made you even a little bit curious, I really recommend checking out this book. I don't really give books number ratings because I personally don't find that super helpful, but I really loved this. It probably would be a 4 or 5 star if I did star ratings, and it's definitely one that I think I will need to revisit in the future because I can see this being a book where you find new things that you notice every time you reread it. And if you are looking for a last-minute spooky read for Halloween, you could absolutely do worse than The Dead House.